Welcome back to the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. You're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. If you want to see more content by me, just follow me on Twitter at CreatorThomas24 for my personal account, or just look up Locked On Diamondbacks on both Twitter and Instagram for the podcast handle. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be doing this podcast without you, the listener, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. But what are we discussing on today's pod? Well, we got JT Shorter the second back on the pod to discuss the Hall of Fame. Did the writers get it right? We're going to discuss David Ortiz's induction, the controversial guys, and even looking ahead to next year's ballot. So it's going to be a jam-packed pod as always. So let's get right into it.
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And without further ado, let's bring JT Shorter on the podcast. JT, come on down to the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. How you doing today, JT?
I'm back.
Oh my God, you're yelling in my ear.
I'm sorry. I'm back. The Cam Newton, I'm back. Notorious Cam Newton.
Well,
good to see the fans. I'm back for my once in a season podcast.
Well, hopefully you're better than Cam Newton after he came back, because it was pretty atrocious this season after coming back. So hopefully you're not atrocious on today's pod, because JT, we brought you on the pod today because, of course, everyone is, around the Locked On MLB network right now is doing their ripping of the MLB Hall of Fame, because it deserves to be ripped. And we might do a little ripping on today's pod because we got a whole bunch I want to talk to you about the Hall of Fame, JT. But I want to first start here on a positive note, because the man, the myth, the legend, Big Papi, David Ortiz, El Senor October, was inducted to the Hall of Fame. First ballot Hall of Famer, a DH. JT, David Ortiz, there's a little controversy surrounding him because he was on that Metro report. He is a guy that only played, 90% of DH in his career. Do you felt like he was deserving of his first ballot Hall of Fame induction?
Absolutely, Millard. He's in the 500 home run club. He had over 1,500 RBIs, I think 1,700 around that number. And for only being a DH, he still came to bat every time, batted 286 lifetime. That's very impressive. And just think about his playoff career, too. I think most memorable is all those playoff hits he had and some big-time home runs to kind of push the Red Sox over the curse. As a Red Sox great, to be honest. One of their best players ever.
Not one of their best players ever. I heard Bill Simmons talking about this. He is on the Mount Rushmore of Boston athletes, and he is the face of the Red Sox. He is the most important player in franchise history. Maybe he's not the best player, but when you think about his postseason moments, what he did culturally for that city, because we know they had some history of racism in Boston. So what David Ortiz has meant to that city overall, especially too after the Boston City Marathon bombings, of course, you were just able to rally that city. So I think when you think of, the quote unquote, character clause that might keep, that has already kept some of these people out the Hall of Fame, I think when you apply that character clause to David Ortiz, like it just increases his profile and the reason why he should be in the Hall of Fame even more. And like you said, you can't talk about David Ortiz without mentioning his postseason heroics, because he did it multiple times. 2004, to beat the Yankees after down 0-3, phenomenal. Multiple big hits in that series. You got 2013, my all-time favorite clutch moment in any postseason, in any baseball moment in history, is when David Ortiz hits that grand slam late in the game against the Tigers off Joaquin Benoit, where you see Torrey Hunter, another dude on the list, just fly over the right field wall. That's a phenomenal moment. David Ortiz, when the game became pressurized and intense, there was literally no one better. I think David Ortiz is the greatest postseason performer we've ever seen. Whenever he got to the World Series, it was basically over. Here are some postseason numbers for David Ortiz, JT. He has a 455 average in the World Series. That's 20 for 44. He has 14 walks and only 5 strikeouts. His OBP is 576 and his OPS is 1372. His postseason career averages of 289 and 947 OPS is absolutely deadly as well. David Ortiz deserves to be, in my book, a first ballot Hall of Famer. I don't care that he didn't play defense, because guess what? When you got to the World Series, JT, you know what he had to do on the road? He had to, well, he always had to hit. But he had to play first base, JT. He had to play first base. And guess what? He was just fine doing it. He's not no Gold Glover over there. He's not an elite defensive first baseman, but he got the job done. He can fill a hole when the time is needed. So he played first base when it came time to do it during the World Series, and he usually dominated. But do you think him being linked to PEDs tarnishes his legacy in any way, or do you view him any differently, knowing that he was on the Mitchell report, which Rob Manfred has said, it really doesn't have a lot of credibility to it?
I think you give him a half asterisk. He was never caught. He was never caught or anything. He never tested positive, supposedly, on any reports, and didn't affect his playing career. Other guys like A-Rod, Barry Bonds, they might have had some. They went to legal precedents, or even got suspended for a couple games. So a Big Papi, a little bit of an asterisk, but still, overall career, you can't even discredit that. I think it was phenomenal what he did, not only in the postseason, but also early on in his career, from the time he was with the Indians for a while, or now the Gladiators. But
the Guardians.
The Guardians, I apologize.
The Gladiators.
Weird name.
That would be a good name.
For sure. But his career overall was just fantastic. He's an icon. You go on the Watch TV, you're looking for Big Papi. You see the 34 on a jersey, you know it's Big Papi's jersey. In Boston, he's an idol, probably up there with Tom Brady. So nothing but the best for him, and congratulations on him making the Hall of Fame.
And he was definitely a Hall of Famer going into his last season as a professional player. But I think people have to go look at David Ortiz's Baseball Reference. He had the greatest season ever by a 40-year-old player. This is what Big Papi did in his final year in 2016. At age 40, led the league in doubles with 48, led the league in RBIs with 127, led the league in slugging with a 620, led the league in OPS with 1021, led the league in intentional bases or intentional walks as well, finished 6th in MVP voting, all-star silver slugger that year, 315 average, absolutely dominant, 38 home runs the last season, was the greatest age 40 season I think we've ever seen in MLB history. I think David Ortiz was definitely deserving, from what he did on the field to what he did off the field. I don't think it's really a credible argument. I don't think there is a credible argument against David Ortiz to be a Hall of Famer. Now, I do think there's an argument if you want to say he wasn't a first ballot Hall of Famer, just because if he had those trepidations about the Mitchell report, or the fact that he didn't play, a lot of defense in his career, then I would have been fine if you're like, he's a second ballot Hall of Famer, not first ballot. But at the end of the day, some people's logic is just, if you're not a first ballot, then you probably shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame at all. And David Ortiz definitely had the career of a first ballot Hall of Famer, regardless of what you say. So I think he was definitely deserving of the first ballot Hall of Fame induction, despite the potential for steroids in his career, because I don't care about the Mitchell report. That thing is fluky to me. So I don't care that he showed up on that. And the dude, again, he played his whole career during the testing era and never tested positive. His teammate Manny Ramirez was testing positive repeatedly, and Big Papi was not. Like, I don't know much more you have to say about Big Papi if you're using the Mitchell report against him, because the commissioner doesn't care about it, and he never tested positive during a testing era. So how can you go against Big Papi? But I want to ask you, JT, about some of the controversial guys, and I think I'm going to start with the Alex Rodriguez. But before we get there, JT, you know what Big Papi actually ate throughout his career to get that big? You know what he was eating to get that protein to smash those home runs?
What's that, Miller?
He was eating a Built Bar, because this episode is brought to you by Built Bar. It's the new year, so that means New Year's resolutions. If yours is about getting fit or eating healthier, make sure you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar is a protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, maybe even better than a candy bar. Built Bar makes it easier to stick to your resolution. It tastes so good, you'll want to eat it. Unlike other protein bars, which can be chalky or waxy or taste like a chemical spill, Built Bar is covered in 100% real chocolate. It's soft, it's easy to chew, absolutely delicious, low calorie, low sugar, high protein, and high fiber, so it's great for that keto diet. Just go to built.com, use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off your next order. Promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. All right. Let's get back into the podcast. And JT, when you look at someone like A-Rod, who I think there are some parallels to a David Ortiz just because they came up during the same era. A-Rod, tested, I believe he tested positive for steroids. If not, he's admitted to using steroids and had the whole biogenesis scandal. And also, those two actually, I did some research a while ago. Those two actually played like on a Dominican team together or something like that, like when they were like teenagers. So they've been linked to each other for years now. So when you look at someone like A-Rod not making it, but someone like David Ortiz does, do you feel like A-Rod might have been robbed out of his Hall of Fame induction? Where do you stand on A-Rod?
Absolutely not. He wasn't eating Built Bars. He was taking steroids. That's for sure.
Built Bars filled with steroids.
He got popped and was suspended in 2014, that whole season. So he did actually get suspended for steroids. But his career, don't get me wrong, was a fantastic career. But I think the fact that he did test positive really taints it and kind of overshadows all the numbers he did put up. Think about this. Over his career, about a 295, which is higher than Big Papi's. He also slugged for 550. He hit, 600 home runs, almost 700 home runs, which is absolutely insane for a 22-year career. But, again, those steroids, man, they catch up to you, and it's tough to kind of put him on the list, especially the fact that he went on to Mike Francesa's show and told him, I didn't take steroids, and then tested positive and was suspended the year after. Kind of tough to believe a liar. That's for sure.
I mean, I don't know if I'm not sure he actually tested positive outside the Mitchell report. He was suspended in 2014, I think mostly just for the biogenesis scandal and being on it. I think everyone definitely knew A-Rod did steroids, but I don't think he actually failed to test outside of the Mitchell report, just doing a quick glance at it. So I guess it's maybe unfair to say he tested positive for steroids because, again, if we don't apply the Mitchell report to David Ortiz, it's hard to apply it to A-Rod. But there was a lot of other reports outside the Mitchell report, like Jose Canseco writing a whole book and then the biogenesis scandal. There's other tea leaves and other areas where it's pretty clear that A-Rod probably took steroids in his career. So maybe A-Rod is still an all-time talent and a Hall of Fame talent, but just because his whole career was just muddied with steroid allegations and it was just always in our face, like it's hard to give him his flowers when we know someone else like David Ortiz actually never tested positive outside the Mitchell report. He was never linked to anything else. There was never another accusation of Big Papi doing steroids outside that 2003 Mitchell report. So it's kind of hard to compare the two because there were so many other instances where A-Rod was, might have been using steroids at different points of his career. So I definitely think A-Rod probably doesn't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame because I think if you're testing positive for steroids after the Mitchell report, or if you're on some, email list for a steroid company and it's being shipped to your house, then that's enough evidence for me as well. So I definitely get why A-Rod is out the Hall of Fame. I mean, he's not off the entire ballot. He'll be on here again next season, but I definitely get why he didn't get voted into this year's Hall of Fame. And it's hard to imagine that he ever will be voted into the Hall of Fame because we just saw a whole bunch of steroid users go 10 years on the ballot and not be put in. And I call them steroid users, but Barry Bonds never tested positive. He just perjured himself in court. Roger Clemens, I don't think ever tested positive either. I'll double check that as we're talking as well. Sammy Sosa definitely seems like he took some steroids in his career as well. But all three of those guys, again, didn't make the Hall of Fame either after 10 years, after all their steroid allegations. And now A-Rod, the clock starts for him to see if he makes it. So after seeing the steroid guys on the ballot this year, do you think A-Rod ever makes the Hall of Fame?
I don't think so. I think this was his chance, and since it didn't go the way, maybe at the very end, if people kind of change their mind, as I feel like we're slowly moving our way towards wanting to put these guys in the Hall of Fame. I saw a lot of love for Barry Bonds, even though he didn't make it. Still was getting love that he was one of the greatest players ever to play the game, which is true. Steroids or not. But I think maybe down the line he might get a push to go in, but I'm not sure. With the baseball writers that are in now, unless they're dying out quickly, I don't think it'll change.
Yeah,
Maybe
Clemens
Hall of Fame for just steroid users or possible steroid users.
Yeah, I just looked up. Clemens never tested positive. He's just like Bonds, where it's like a lot of reports and a lot of links to steroids, but never a failed test. Except I think he was on the Mitchell report too, possibly. I think he was definitely in Canseco's book, and it was another report that linked him with Andy Pettitte. So Clemens, I think I'm putting him in the Hall of Fame just because basically my overall logic, and I've explained this on a podcast before. I look at the Mitchell report as like the pivot point in MLB history when it comes to steroid use. Pre-Mitchell report, pre-testing, all those guys, if any of them did steroids and they put up Hall of Fame numbers, I do not care. If you were not getting tested for steroids, if majority of the league or half the league, however many people in the league were doing steroids because it was just okay and accepted by baseball because they turned their blind eye to it, then those guys should be in the Hall of Fame. But anyone post-Mitchell report that's getting repeatedly tested and they test positive, then I think I'm going to be a little bit more hesitant. So even though Manny Ramirez is one of my all-time favorite players, it's hard for me to put him in the Hall of Fame. But the Barry Bonds, the Roger Clemens, the Sammy Sosa's, like Sammy Sosa, there's definitely feels like a delineation in his career because he was like a 25-25 guy for like the first 10 years. And then all of a sudden, age 35, he's like smacking 50 home runs. It's like, where did this come from? But I think I would still put someone like him in the Hall of Fame. And if you want to do I've heard this talked about a whole bunch, like if you want to do the whole, let's put a steroid wing in the MLB Hall of Fame, like I guess you could do that because it's a museum, but I would rather just put them in and not put an asterisk. I don't care if they did steroids or not because it wasn't tested and baseball itself didn't care. We already have steroid users in the Hall of Fame because not all steroids have been banned the last 100 years. So there were guys in the 50s doing PEDs that are now retroactively banned, but you're not taking those guys out the Hall of Fame. So overall, the whole Hall of Fame discourse when it comes to steroids and these guys, it just, it's pretty overdone and it's pretty monotonous and redundant a lot of the time. But I think we still need to talk about it because they will have another chance. I believe there's some veterans committee where they can have a chance later in the year to make the Hall of Fame, but we'll see what happens with the Clemens and a Bonds and Sosa. I think Bonds and Clemens have a stronger chance than a Sammy Sosa. Sosa, it's easier to look at his career and potentially see where he might have started taking steroids, but Bonds was like 3-time MVP by the time he was 25. Clemens has like 8 Cy Young awards. Like their numbers are just so insane. Like, even if they did steroids, like it's still almost impossible to do what those two guys did. So I think I'm definitely okay putting those controversial guys in the Bonds, the Clemens, the Sosa. And we didn't even talk about Curt Schilling. So let's talk about him before we get to segment number 3, because he's another guy, as I mentioned earlier, we bring up character clause. That's something that definitely helped David Ortiz in his Hall of Fame voting process. But someone like Curt Schilling, it definitely didn't help him because he's someone that has had some disgusting comments over the last few years that we won't get into. But still, the guy was a super talented pitcher. He was basically, if you look at the numbers and production, probably it was like Madison Bumgarner-esque, I want to say, during the regular season. And then when he got to the postseason, he was one of the best postseason pitchers of all time. Won the 2001 World Series with the D-backs, co-World Series MVPs with Randy Johnson. He was literally pitching on the same level as Randy Johnson, one of the 5 greatest pitchers of the last 45 years or something like that. So I would personally put Curt Schilling in my Hall of Fame because, put the politics aside, he was a guy that was pretty damn good in the regular season, I would say a low-end number 1 starter, but then once he got to the postseason, he was dominant, absolute superstar pitcher. So JT is a Hall of Famer in my book, but how do you feel about Curt Schilling?
That's tough. He had a great career. I don't see him as a Hall of Famer. I think he's just one of those great pitchers who we're gonna just note down as a great pitcher and not a Hall of Famer. The bloody sock moment was probably something they will continue to play on those World Series montages. But I don't know. In my book, I don't think he was a Hall of Famer. He had great numbers, don't get me wrong. but I don't think he dominated the league as much as we had thought over his whole career. You know, what, four Cy Youngs is pretty good over 20 years, but I don't know. I didn't see him as a Hall of Famer in my book.
He finished second 3 times.
Oh,
and
apologize. Second. Yeah.
It's okay, sir. It's okay, sir. I got the baseball reference pulled up. If he won 4 Cy Youngs, JT, it wouldn't be interesting. We wouldn't be having a discussion right now. Oh, he's also a 3-time World Series champion, which is kind of interesting. I don't think people bring that up enough. He won 0-1 with the D-backs and then won 2 more with the Red Sox. His career postseason ERA is 2.23. He started 19 games in the postseason, a .968 whip. The dude was phenomenal. And in the World Series, like a big poppy, 7 starts, 2.06 ERA, 48 innings pitched, only 11 earned runs, 43 strikeouts, and only 10 walks. Again, the dude was dominant in the postseason, and I'm someone that weighs the postseason. I still care about wins and losses. I still think we play regular season games to win the big chip at the end. I know the Mike Trout supporters don't want to hear that. The playoffs matter. I know it does. I know you don't want to hear that. That's okay. But Curt Schilling, he should be in the Hall of Fame because the postseason does matter. And like a big poppy, he was a lot greater on the greatest stage. Now, JT, we'll discuss some biggest surprises not to make it. We got a whole bunch still to discuss, so this is going to be a longer pod than you might have expected today. But if you want to bet on something, JT, do you know where you have to go?
No clue, Millard.
You have to go to BetOnline because this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline would like to wish you a happy new betting year as we continue our march to the playoffs and beyond. BetOnline remains the #1 spot for all the best sports wagering for 2022. A new year and a new updated desktop and mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LOCKEDON to get started. From football, basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for 2022. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right. Let's get back into the podcast. Let me pull up my next note. And JT, looking at the MLB Hall of Fame list, were there any big surprises that stuck out to you? We already discussed the controversial guys, but outside of the steroid users and some of those players, were there anybody that stood out to you on the Hall of Fame where you're like, that guy didn't make it? Only David Ortiz?
Honestly, Millard, I would say Todd Helton was one big surprise for me. I know it's his 4th year on the ballot, but he had a tremendous career. A 5-time All-Star, an MVP towards the end of his career. Todd Helton might be one of the greatest hitters we've ever seen.
What baseball reference are you looking at where you're getting these MVPs and Cy Youngs from? He has no MVP.
I said All-Star.
He said MVP. Well, check
MVP
the tape.
Came in 13th place. I can't read the baseball reference. But
he picked up an MVP later in his career.
5 All-Star appearances from 2000 2004. He owned the early 2000s, right around that steroid testing era. So who knows what's going on in Colorado, really.
Peak years were during the Mitchell Port era.
But I still think Todd Helton probably one of the greatest hitters we've seen. I think he was just very dominant around that early 2000s year. Never quite did too much playoff-wise because he was on the Rockies. But I think he was a great hitter. Another guy who surprised me is going to be Billy Wagner. Just an overall great pitcher. I think he pitched for 15, 16 years, which is quite tremendous just to have your arm be able to function that long and not see too many injuries. I know he started to fade a little bit towards the end of his career. But again, another 5-6 All-Star appearance guy. Maybe not the greatest pitchers you've ever seen, but I thought he was pretty dominant for when he played in that early 2000s, late 90s time frame. And all the guys are on steroids hitting bombs. So,
yeah, Billy Wagner's pretty good. He's like top 8 or 9 all time in saves as a closer. Todd Helton, he was pretty good too. He basically had like a 7-year stretch where he was one of the most dominant power hitters in baseball. And then there was another few years after that where his power pretty much disappeared, but he was still like a 300 hitter and still was a doubles machine and could still get your OPS above 800. So I think I would put Todd Helton in I think I would probably give him a vote. I think I would probably give Billy Wagner a vote too. But Scott Rolen is someone that gets brought up a lot. I just didn't see enough Scott Rolen to really give an opinion. I knew he was pretty damn good, and whenever I played MLB The Show, he was always one of the better players. His numbers definitely look Hall of Fame-ish, but I think Scott Rolen is someone that people feel like is a slam dunk, but I'm a little bit more hesitant than some of the other guys. Gary Sheffield is someone that I feel pretty good about when just looking at the raw numbers. Like, the man played 22 years and he was a career 295 hitter. It's like a 25-25 guy for like 20 years. Like, Gary Sheffield numbers, I think, are pretty damn good once you look at them. And also, Andrew Jones is someone that sticks out to me. He's like a 10-time Gold Glover guy who averaged like 35 home runs a season for like 9 years. Pretty good the first few years at stealing bases too, which is like a nice little component of your game. Never a high average guy, but still a career 823 OPS. So I think Andrew Jones is also someone that's interesting. And Jeff Kent is someone, I don't know. He had a very good career, but is he a Hall of Famer? I think he's probably right on the cusp as well. Won an MVP, so maybe Jeff Kent is a Hall of Famer. He's also someone, he's kind of like Scott Rolen to me, where they have the numbers, but I don't know. Something about them just doesn't feel Hall of Fame-ish to me. I could definitely be wrong about that. And if you want to tell me I'm wrong, just tell me at Creator Thomas 24 for my personal account. I do not mind at all. Manny Ramirez, steroid stuff, I think the dude has failed like 3 tests. Like he's failed a lot of tests in his career. It was like 1 test. Maybe you could turn the blind eye, but it's been like 2 or 3. Every time he comes back to baseball, he fails another test. So he's probably failing a test as we speak. Mark Burley, I'm not on the Mark Burley train. He was a workhorse guy, but when you look at his numbers, he was like a career 3.8 guy as an ERA, FIP 4.11. So I'm not too big on Mark Burley. And then there's some other interesting names, but I think a lot of these guys were cuspers, borderline Hall of Famers, but not really, like a Torrey Hunter, Andy Pettitte. I don't think they were actually Hall of Fame type players. So really just from the list of people who missed out, I think Bobby Abreu is another guy who has really good looking stats, but probably isn't Hall of Famer. So I would agree Todd Helton, probably Billy Wagner, Sheffield, and Jones. And then Kent, and I think Kent probably has a better argument than Scott Rolen, but I don't think I'm disagreeing with anyone who has Scott Rolen or Jeff Kent in their MLB Hall of Fame. So shout out those guys because they deserve a shout out. They had a great career as well. But is there anyone who is forever off the ballot from this year's 2022 ballot who did not get 5% of votes, who will not be returning next year? Any of those guys that you're like, I felt like they could have, maybe gained some traction, maybe been in the Hall of Fame after a few more ballots? Or anyone who you would just like to make. Sorry to cut you off. I was just gonna say, or anyone you'd like to make an argument for.
I got to go with my guy Ryan Howard. I feel like he kind of got screwed over a little bit. Just a one and done situation. He had a pretty good career. He hit almost 400 home runs in a 10-year career, possibly. So I know injuries got to him, and he struck out a ton. He struck out more than anyone almost in baseball. Most seasons. But rookie of the year, he was an MVP, won a World Series. I think you got to give him a chance, got to give him a second look. I know the rules are if you don't get more than 5% on your first ballot, you're done. Maybe we should try to change the rules to 2, give some guys another shot, because everyone's not a first ballot Hall of Famer, that's for sure. But to not make it to the second round sucks.
Well, then that's why I asked. Should you be a Hall of Famer if you're not first ballot?
Well, you didn't ask me, you asked the people, but
I'm asking you now.
Now you're asking me. No, I think you don't have to be a first ballot to be a Hall of Famer. I think a second ballot works. They gave it to guys who die. I think after they're dead, you get like another year of eligibility on the ballot. So maybe we'll see Bonds or one of them whenever their time comes to possibly make the ballot. But yeah, I think it does stink for that one and done situation. You probably need 2 years to kind of really judge. Because baseball writers really focusing on those high hitter players at the time. Maybe a different class for Ryan Howard, he wouldn't be the first ballot.
Yeah, maybe. I doubt he's a first ballot in a different class. But Howard had a pretty good career. I mean, I thought he was one of the better players in baseball during his prime, but I never felt like he was a Hall of Fame type player. We were discussing off the pod. He was basically a better version than a Chris Davis. His prime basically lasted twice as long as Chris Davis's, but again, it was only like a 6-7 year stretch where Ryan Howard was dominant, and then the strikeouts started coming through. His average dropped tremendously, and then the power just started to go as well. So Ryan Howard, I don't think he makes my Hall of Fame, but he makes my Hall of Very Good. But I think two guys who are very unsexy, but I think definitely deserve a mention. I think definitely shouldn't have been one and dones are Jonathan Papelbon and Joe Nathan, because Papelbon, again, is just one of those guys who was very good during the regular season and then went up another level during the postseason. I actually have his postseason numbers here. A 1 ERA in the postseason. He has 27 innings pitched in the postseason. The only time he gave up an earned run was in his very last postseason appearance. He gave up 3 earned runs his very last time. So before that, he went like 26 straight innings without ever giving up a run or anything like that. Straight dominant. And what more can you want from your closer, your back end reliever, than a guy who's going to shut it down whenever he gets the ball late in games? Won the World Series with the Red Sox in 2007, 2.44 ERA for his career. He's like 10th all time in saves, and among the top 10 in career saves leader. He's the only one with 12 years or less of playing time. There's actually one other guy, Craig Kimbrell, with 12 years, who's top 10, but after this season, he's going to be 13. So he's going to have the fewest amount of years on the top 10 list, but still be top 10, which I think is pretty impressive. So I think I would give Papelbon my vote. And I think I would also give it Joe Nathan, because if you take the best 7 years of Joe Nathan, it's basically one of the best closing 7-year stretches of all time. I think him, Papelbon, and Billy Wagner are all kind of comparable when you look at the numbers and all-time rankings. So because of that, I think if you're going to put, I think Papelbon and Nathan weren't that far off of Billy Wagner, from a production standpoint. So I think they just deserved another look. So I don't know if Papelbon and Nathan make the Hall of Fame, but I don't know if they should have been one and done. And I think the guy who was a one and done that makes me the saddest is a Tim Lincecum, because he's someone that just started his career hellish. Like, he had one of the best starts ever. His second year in baseball, he won a Cy Young. His third year in baseball, he won a Cy Young. Then he was a Cy Young candidate the next 2 years. And then it was basically over for him by his 6th season in baseball. It was like, it wasn't over in terms of he was done playing, but like his prime was basically done by his 6th year. By the time he turned 28 years old, it was like, how's Tim Lincecum washed already? Which I don't think makes a lot of sense when you watch his early part of his career. So I think that's pretty sad. I think Prince Fielder is also another guy that had a Hall of Fame career trajectory earlier in his career, and then it kind of fell off too because of injuries, and then the trade to the Tigers really didn't help him as well. I think Carl Crawford got kind of disrespected. I don't think he's a Hall of Famer, but my man didn't even get one vote. I thought he was at least pretty good.
Peavy too.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't give Peavy a vote, but if AJ Pierzynski is getting a vote, then I'm probably giving Carl Crawford a vote. So that's really my case there with Carl Crawford. But I think Papelbon and Joe Nathan were the two guys where I'm like, I think they should have gotten at least 5% of votes. Mark Teixeira being on this list, I think it's kind of funny. I think it's mostly because he was Yankee. He was definitely an all-star type player during his prime, but I don't know if he was a Hall of Famer. But JT, when you're looking ahead to next year's ballot, is there anyone that you think can make the Hall of Fame from this year, or any newcomers that you think can make the Hall of Fame next season?
It's going to be tough, Millard. Looking at the list right now, I think the only one that I really foresee could be a first-year, first ballot guy is a Carlos Beltran. I think he had a pretty sustainable career. What did he bat? 279, pretty good average. Not 300 or anything, but pretty good. I think he had a pretty long career, bounced around a little bit through the league, and kept up his hitting and fielding. Probably one of the better players we've seen out of that class. Not sure if it'd be a first ballot Hall of Famer. He might go to the second or third round. That's one of the guys I'm seeing. Another one is K-Rod, Francisco Rodriguez. He was probably one of the other dominant closers, as you said earlier, that we've ever seen in baseball history. So I think that those two might have a shot. Not sure how the voters will go. Not sure if they'll lean to another player or lean towards guys in their second or third years of the ballot next year. But we'll see what they have in the store.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I think K-Rod might have the strongest case. It's close with him and Carlos Beltran. I mean, he led the league in saves 3 times at age 34, which was like his how many years? Which was his 15th year in baseball. He was still saved 44 games at age 34, his 15th year in baseball, saved 45 games his 4th year in baseball at age 23. So this guy had a very long career, averaged 31 saves a season over 162 game ratio, absolutely dominant. He's 4th all time in saves. So I think he's probably going to have a pretty strong case to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. I think Carlos Beltran also has a pretty strong case because he just was another one of those guys that was so good for so long and was the legit all-star. He made an all-star team at age 39, 36, and 35. So he was still very productive late in his career. A ton of power, 30-plus home run kind of guy. Stolen bases too early in his career. Had that speed power combo for him. Can hit for average. Can get on base consistently. OPS off the chart. So I think Carlos Beltran is definitely a Hall of Famer as well. I'm just not sure if he's a first ballot, but I think him and K-Rod probably do because they did. I think they probably overlapped on the Mets a little bit. I think for a couple of years there. So their careers are, I guess, kind of linked together. So I think they both make it. But when you look at the rest of this first ballot, first timers for next season, the list is kind of weak, JT. I'm not going to name all the guys, but someone like John Lackey, Mike Napoli, Bronson Aurora, Stephen Drew, D-back, Stephen Drew, Andre Ethier, like Joe Blanton. Like there's some really disgusting lists. And I think Beltran and who was the other guy I was just talking about? Beltran and K-Rod. Yeah, I think Beltran and K-Rod are the only two guys that have strong cases to be first ballot. And then I could see maybe a few ballots down the line. Potentially a Jared Weaver. I'm not sure if he's a slam dunk Hall of Famer. He was definitely one of the best pitchers in baseball during his prime. But how long did it last? Not very long. It was basically like another one of those guys who was like 6 or 7 years of really great stuff. Few top 5 Cy Young finishes. So I'm not sure if he makes it either, but I think when you look at next year's ballot, I think it'll be more about the guys who are coming back from this past season, plus a Beltran, a Weaver, and a K-Rod. I think those are pretty much only 3 names from next year's ballot that matters, at least as first timers. And then from this year, like you said before, Todd Helton, Billy Wagner, a couple of guys I mentioned, I think are also going to have strong cases for next season. So we'll see what happens with the Hall of Fame. This is a discussion that we, of course, always have at this time of the year. It's always great podcast content because we could be mad before the Hall of Fame voting takes place about how they're not going to be voted in. And then we could be mad after the Hall of Fame voting takes place because they didn't get voted in. So, JT, how do you feel about the Hall of Fame voting process as a whole? And how do you feel about the MLB Hall of Fame? Has it lost any credibility to you over the years?
I think over the years it's kind of devolved a little bit. I think the writers have really started to get stuck in their ways and not let guys who they've thought 10 years ago shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame of continue that mindset through the Hall of Fame voting process. Maybe over the years, you kind of change your perspective a little bit as times evolve and more people are using steroids. Maybe we add a new wing, like you said earlier, or even kind of just change it up. Like all-star voting, maybe you have one just fan vote and then you tweet it in. We're on a new social media wave now. Have a fan vote for that last Hall of Fame spot, possibly. I'm not really sure. That might shake things up. So I'm not sure if anyone's sitting down to watch the Hall of Fame speeches. Maybe we get you a vote, Millard. How about that? We petition to get you a vote.
I need a vote. But then again, people are going to listen to this and be like, you don't even think Scott Rowland, Jeff Kent are Hall of Famers? You don't deserve a vote. That could be true. I'm not too sure. But I do think that maybe we could make it the voting process where it counts maybe half of the writers and half of the fans and maybe half of like coaching or managers or something and players, because we can't have blank ballots submitted to the Hall of Fame. Like you're looking at the Hall of Fame ballot, you tell me there's no Hall of Famers. Or you look at the ballot and you say, you know what? Just Jeff Kent. He's the only one that deserves to be a Hall of Famer. Or just Scott Rowland. Like that kind of stuff doesn't make any sense at all. So I think the voting process has gone too crazy because I think, like you said, the voters have been too hyped up on power recently. I think they've been abusing their power when it comes to the voting process, keeping guys who deserve to be in the Hall of Fame out of it. And now they have to take it to the Veterans Committee. So the voting for the Hall of Fame, baseball just repeatedly shoots themselves in the foot when it comes to their sport of promoting it and growing it. So this is just another example of that. So I am not surprised. JT, thank you for hopping on today's pod, but where can the listeners find you so they can see more of your work?
Thanks for having me. I'm on Twitter at JT Shorter or JT_Shorter. shoot me a message. I'm good for some chat on Twitter. So thanks for having me on.
No problem. Thanks for coming on last minute. Thanks for making some time today, sir. And that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Thank you to everyone who tuned into today's pod. Thank you to everyone who makes Locked On Diamondbacks their first listen every day. I would not be doing this podcast without you. It's free and available on all platforms. So please tell your friends. Go make your second listen of the day. Locked On Bets with your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling if you want to put some extra money in your pocket. Come back next week for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. Go back and catch up on any pods you might have missed this week. And as always, stay safe and stay healthy. Deuces.